I once described the history of the band as being like a pram that's been pushed down a hill. There was always a hint at the back of my mind that our journey could be quite twisted. I've always wanted us to just be a band on our own. Sometimes that's worked, and sometimes it's worked against us, but it's just the path we've chosen.
Suddenly, we were everywhere. There was just a sense of how far can this go?
We were much less in control of it than people might assume.
Suede started really when Simon was in the band and Bernard was in the band.
At the back of my mind, I wanted it to be about songwriting. This is what I wanted to do before I met Brett, before the band evolved.
I did realise that we were on a kind of collision course, that he was always going to leave, and there was nothing that I could really do.
So they invited me for an audition, but I still didn't think they'd actually offer me the job. That was never going to happen. And then it did.
Well, I don't know why they've decided this, but apparently Suede wants another member.
There was always a kind of red button of self-destruction, which has do not press above it, and everyone's going, that looks nice.
Simon did always seem to have a camera in his hand in the early days.
At the time, I hated it. But when you see the high points, and when you see the low points, I'm really glad that we had it.
When we suddenly appeared, it felt like it was this very fast, overnight kind of phenomenon. But there were many years of horrible struggle. It did feel like the longest ever overnight success.
I don't think 4 years is a long time at all for any band to kind of find their way. Sometimes it can be quite immediate. I mean, the Smiths, for example, it was 6 months later.
I was in a band when I was at college. I was 20, 21, and we were signed, and it was all over in 6 months. I don't think we even gigged.
My experience in Elastica was that it came together so fast, the sound came together really fast, it was really easy. Suede was the opposite. It was years of nothing quite working and things not quite falling into place.
I don't think we've ever had a plan. I think we had an idea of a band, but we didn't really know what to do.
There's a real quiet love and respect in Matt and Brett's relationship, for sure. The reason Suede has gone for so long is because of the strength of their relationship. I mean, they are like brothers. They've known each other forever.
I suppose it began back behind our shoulder there in the college that we both went to. I always wanted to be in a band from as long ago as I can remember, just it seeming the most natural thing that someone should do. But never seeing anyone who lived where I did who could have been in a band, you know. You didn't even see people who looked like they were in a band.
Matt had this kind of mystique, kind of a bit of an aura, which I kind of noticed from afar. He sidled up to me and we started talking about music one day. Well, you were goth, really, weren't you?
I don't think there's any way of getting around it.
There's no beating around the bush. You were definitely a goth. You used to have back-combed hair.
Yeah, paisley shirt.
And a paisley shirt.
Brett looked like a 60s B actor.
Well, I had that lemon yellow suit. I got in a sale in Top Man down in Brighton. I think I described myself as looking like a cut-price Cliff Richard.
Yeah.
More accurate.
He was like a rare peacock that I'd never seen before. So when he walks in, you think, OK, this is different to something I've seen. I don't know what I'm seeing, but it's certainly different.
Somewhere over here, there was a sort of porter cabin, and Matt asked me to be in his band, which is called Paint It Black.
Music to me was absolutely everything.
Yeah.
It was what I thought about, it's what I wanted to do.
They were very, very much part of a gang. They self-identified. They were the cool kids.
I can remember being intensely jealous of people like Echo and the Bunnymen and the Smiths, who had these roots. Even if they fought against the roots, you know, it's like, you can't really have your roots here.
And even though Hayward Heath doesn't have an identity that we were proud of, we used the drabness, the mundanity, the dead-end nature of it to inspire what we were writing about. It became about documenting this, but a kind of escape from this as well. That sense of frustration is born from being brought up in places like this. You're always peering up the railway tracks. You're always like looking to the horizon for something because it's not there for you.
It must have been very claustrophobic for them. I see that. And, you know, they couldn't wait to get to London.
I remember seeing Brett the day that we were all signing in for our student IDs at UCL. He had sort of a long flick and he had a pair of earrings and he had a handbag. I mean, it was a lady's handbag. And I had this moment of thinking, is that a boy or a girl? And just finding him devastatingly attractive. But I just knew that we were going to be together. Within a few weeks of meeting Brett, he took me back to his house in Finsbury Park, and there were 6 guys living there. Matt was one of them.
Justine, I met her as Brett's girlfriend before we ever kind of made music together. And he brought back this incredible girl, just so smart and so funny.
Justine was a huge, huge influence on me in terms of kind of who I became as a person. If I hadn't have met Justine, I possibly wouldn't be sitting here. And absolutely, definitely, in terms of what Suede became, even though when we first appeared, she wasn't in the band.
She pushed Suede really hard.
It wasn't a band at that point. You know, it was 3 of us messing about in a bedroom. But I'm pretty sure that I was a big part of trying to get it out of the bedroom and onto some sort of stage somewhere.
We'd put an advert in, The Enemy, and we'd met a couple of people.
I remember there were a stream of really improbable people turning up who were either 55 or full-on punks with huge Mohicans.
And Bernard came over, and he looked really, really young. I can remember him asking how old we were, and said, oh, we're 23, and him being kind of like, well, you better get a move on then. He sat and played the guitar, and it just poured out of him. It was one of those really obvious moments. He left, and we were just like, well, we don't need to look for anyone else.
That was the moment where it seemed like it could be really good.
From the very start, I mean, there's like a whole phase before making the first album when we were sort of a different band, really, and not very good.
They're quite fade, the very early Suede songs. It was kind of like, well, we really need a drummer. I think we thought it was going to be really easy.
Justin Welsh, who ended up being the drummer from Elastica, he was in the band for about 3 weeks, and we found out that he was in 6 other bands.
Mike Joyce contacting us and coming from an audition was one of the strangest things that ever happened to us.
I remember actually sitting in a lecture and Brett coming up to me with a handwritten note saying, Mike Joyce wants to audition for the band.
The way that Bernard and Brett and Matt worked together, you know, that was the foundation of really, of something quite good.
We went up and did some demos with Mike.
It never would have worked. We would have been Mike Joyce's new band.
It was there. It was just a matter of getting the right pieces of the jigsaw. To me, Suede kind of nailed that with Sam.
I was selling tickets at Ulu, at the box office there, because I used to have gigs on up in the student union bar upstairs. And my manager there was Ricky.
It's very strange that Ricky Gervais is involved in any way.
I was always friends with Simon, though. I think that was probably a bigger connection than me managing Suede. I was a failed musician myself, and I thought, oh, at least it's doing something to do with music. And I think literally the only thing I ever did to help Suede is I sent the demo tape to a few A&R people. But I remember saying, oh, I'm rubbish at this, and the band agreed. There was no tears. I was in an OK job in a student union, helping putting on bands. Simon was already working in the ticket shop.
I was up in the office making some posters for, I think, Nirvana were playing there. and they said, come and have a listen to this tape, what do you think? I thought, oh, this is fantastic. It's great, but why have you got a drum machine? So you need to get them a drummer. I asked if I could get an audition. And he said, no, because you don't wear flares and you haven't got a fringe. Which I was a bit pissed off about.
Simon replaced the drum machine, so the tightness and the rhythm took a hit. But the hair was much funnier because the drum machine had just normal hair. And then this freak comes along who can't drum but has got fucking funny hair.
Do you remember how to set up your drums? I mean,
I do, actually. Well,
now you have people
yeah,
to do
it's pretty easy. I haven't done it for quite a while.
I just want you to present this to you, Simon. This is the man whose job you took. So are you feeling guilty about that?
I'm feeling terribly
he had
guilty.
a wife and 2 little drum machines to support.
To support.
And
two tom-toms.
This is the contraption that used to break down in the middle of gigs. And we did those gigs at... It was at the Bull and Gate, wasn't it?
So it wasn't a lot of competition, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were slightly better than the drum machine, so there you go.
I got the job, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, drum machine.
But you had your own drums, didn't you? At the time?
I did have, well, these are the drums I had. It took me 2 years to buy these on HP. And I cleaned toilets in Stratford-on-Avon for 2 years, literally cleaning shit off walls.
I always thought Simon was a very, very underrated and slightly ignored element in Suede's development musically, you know, what he brought to the picture. I think with a different drummer, Suede could possibly have gone in a completely different direction. I think it's like, you know, you brought in the kind of like the punky, straight rocky sort of thing.
Suede started really when Simon was in the band and Bernard was in the band.
At the back of my mind, I wanted it to be about songwriting. This is what I wanted to do before I met Brett, before, you know, there was any band involved. And it took about 1.5 years after actually meeting them for that to evolve.
I went around to Bernard's flat out in Leighton, out in East London, and he kind of opened the door and he had this kind of slightly wild-eyed expression and he kind of ushered me in and he played me a demo that he'd made, and it was basically the Drowners.
The Drowners is supposed to be Children of the Revolution. That's where it came from for me. Something with big block chords.
I remember rushing back with this cassette and working on the song all day and all night.
I remember when he first played me the Drowners and we both went simultaneously, yes, that is the song.
You're taking me over. I was like, OK, that's a great pop hook. And I'd always understood the power of the hook, but understanding it and being able to do it were very, very different things. We'd opened a door that had previously been closed to us when we wrote that song.
I remember waking up in the morning and running over to the typewriter to see what was on it a lot, and often just being amazed by this whole world that was in Brett's head.
He used words that weren't rock words, you know, paracetamol, leotard, loony. Although it could be quite fantastical, it was the real life at the heart of it.
The sexuality in the lyrics was a really important thing. I always wanted it to talk about sexuality in the same way that Lucian Freud paints the human body. This sort of like stark realism, slightly uncomfortable, but kind of like very, very real, sort of candle-coloured skin under a fluorescent light.
I remember being at the Premises, trying it out there for the first time.
Everything happened at the Premises. Suede rehearsed there. That's where I met Damon, was at the Premises. That's the first time I ever met him.
We were in this weird and horrible situation that Brett and Justine had split up and she'd met someone else, but she was still in the band. I don't think it ever would have worked. Eventually Justine left.
I don't know how many months it was, but it was pretty awful, and just this heavy feeling in rehearsals, and, you know, Brett was really having a hard time.
To lose a relationship that's not just your lover, but someone you're working with, someone who you're making art with.
At the time, it was very painful, but it was possibly the best thing that ever happened to me. It kind of gave the songs a direction. Things like Pantomime Horse, you can hear it in that song.
I was born as a pantomime horse, ugly as the sun when it falls to the floor. I was cut from the wreckage one time. This is what I get for being that way.
I think Brett is very, very good at not shying away from hard and unpleasant emotions in yourself. When they split, I think you can hear that.
It kind of enabled me to tap into something very primal in myself. This sense of loss and grief and frustration, jealousy and all of these things, which are very, 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 very powerful things. When I look back at what I was doing as a lyricist in those times, I was trying to reflect the world I saw around me. This sort of broken, disaffected world of squats and roundabouts and dole cues. And that was the world that I found myself in after me and Justine had split up. But at the same time, it was very much an escape from that.
At that time, we were sort of quite different, and I think that sort of fed a lot of these weird songs. But, you know, at the end of the day, they're not actually weird songs at all.
It's not really until you go and play it out in London, when no one is making records like that at all, that you're suddenly kind of like, oh, right, we're quite strange.
And there was that kind of crossover period where we were writing all these, what I thought were pretty fantastic songs, things like He's Dead and Moving. But still playing to two people in pubs.
When I saw Suede, I wasn't thinking, oh, you're only playing to 4 people. I was thinking, this is amazing, you're not going to be playing to 4 people for very long.
We had 3 years of struggle.
It was a long time until we got noticed.
I think it was because we were so against the grain. At the time, all the other bands were indie dance.
When you're trying to join in with a crowd, you really have to be quite good at it to assimilate. If you're not, you have to really set yourself apart. And we weren't very good at fitting in with the crowd that was there.
We'd been passed on by everyone. People really, really weren't interested.
And it was this odd phenomenon where I think lots of A&R men that had come to see us in the very early days, they'd seen us and decided we were rubbish. So when we came back and started playing these good songs, they'd kind of like already passed on us.
I had been doing A&R for major record labels and had lost my job at RCA and was thinking about starting a record label, which was a particularly crazy idea. And so I was going out seeing lots of bands.
Saul Galpin, he came to see us at the venue in New Cross. We were doing an NME gig, which was called On for 92. I think we were sort of second on, I think.
And they came on, and I was completely blown away. They were completely out of step with everything that was going on at the time. And that's what attracted me to them, was the fact that they were unfashionable. And all these A&R men were at the bar, and no one had even bothered to watch it. I spent the whole weekend thinking, have I just seen, like, something that's earth-shattering? And
one person called me up, and that was Saul.
They told me that nobody else had called them. I was the only person that had rang them. So that was quite a relief, really.
Saul Galpin, he was like us, I think. He felt like he had great ideas and he wasn't being listened to.
Hello? Yes, Phil?
So we signed a deal with Saul's label, Nude. And we started recording The Drowners, and then just suddenly, the Melody Maker came out, and we were on the front cover.
It was actually that cover of Melody Maker that changed everything.
I remember kind of like seeing it, walking down the street with Man, seeing our faces on the cover, and it was this shocking moment.
And to put a new band on the front cover who hadn't released a single yet was quite a thing, because it meant the whole industry and everybody in the media had woken up to who is this band.
It was literally 0 to 60, just like that.
You can measure success really, really simply if you're in a band. People come to see you who you don't know.
It really was. It was from nothing to loads of people.
Then it's wild. People started pushing themselves to the front. It was really physical.
It went from 3 people to 30 people to 100 people to 300 people.
I remember going to see them play after I left, and it was just 4 boys on stage, and it sounded amazing, and it didn't have me muddying up the sound and kind of confusing the look.
Suddenly there was Morrissey there, suddenly the Suggs, and Kirsty MacColl.
Youth and looks, sexuality, rock and roll, great songs.
These are people who've been in bedrooms like ours and jobs like ours, who just suddenly something clicked with them.
There was a bit of a regional divide. Scotland, it was legendary where they pretended to have Scottish accents rather than get beaten up in the toilets.
The first single, The Drowners, charted at 49, and the second, Metal Mickey, went in at 17.
Oh, Dad, she's driving me mad has got to be one of the great lines ever in a pop song. And suddenly you're thinking about Anthony Newley, and you're thinking about vaudeville, and even Carry On films, you know, where they'd say things like that. It is, I think, the great one of those early Suede singles, and that is saying something.
The next single went in at number 7, which was Animal Nitrate.
I heard this rumour, an apocryphal rumour, Kate Bush's The Man with the Child in His Eyes was about masturbation. What a brilliant thing to sort of smuggle this kind of Trojan horse into the fortress of the mainstream. And that's what I wanted to do with Animal Nitrate. I wanted to kind of write this song that was about sexuality and abuse, but to sort of frame it within a kind of pop context. And I loved hearing it on mainstream radio and on mainstream TV. And even the title, you know, how did they miss that? It seemed to be so overt that it was almost like hiding in plain sight. It's poppers. It's a kind of sort of weird stuff that you sniff and it kind of makes your head go funny. It's in the 90s, it was very much associated with the gay world. My use of gay imagery, and it's something that I think I got criticised for a lot at the time. People misunderstood what I was doing. There's a very famous quote of mine where I said, I'm a bisexual man who's never had a homosexual experience. And I need to clarify where that came from. I was actually talking about songwriting at the time. I was talking about how I approach songs. So when I was writing those early songs, I was often occupying the perspective of gay men, housewives, third parties, and writing songs from different perspectives, and it kind of kept it fresh for me.
I walked down the road with Brett, people think that we were boyfriends, you know. We lived in Portobello Road, we wore fur coats, leather trousers. It wasn't a gay thing, it wasn't trying to get any brownie points from the press. That was our look. The rest of the band members took on that look.
It's part of the kind of the unity of hanging out with each other. The more you hang out, you sort of, oh, I quite like those trousers. Oh, they're quite a good jacket. I'll get one of those. We end up sort of borrowing stuff as well. You develop this sort of band identity. What looks like a sort of preconceived, quote-unquote, look is actually kind of comes about by accident.
Once we'd recorded Suede's debut album, I felt that it would be an album at that point that would speak to a generation. It was great when it went straight to #1. That was a fantastic week.
I mean, there's an element of vindication as well, because it'd been so hard to get where we got to on the first record, and we were completely out on our own. There was nobody like us.
And then it kind of turned into this sort of snowball of press profile.
Yes, I mean, they were on the front cover of something like 40 or 50 magazines over a period of like 18 months or something. It was something insane.
The thing about the press is it was dragged along behind it.
They were on the front page of every magazine, and we used to go to our local shop, and we'd go there every night, and we'd go for all the magazines and put them on the fronts, and it was just like, wow, it's actually happening.
I think you lose control of it as well, that's the thing. The context changes when you've got 200,000 people buying those songs.
Britpop. Oh, God.
I think I first heard the word Britpop the same time everyone else did, at the Select front cover, with Brett superimposed onto a Union Jack with Yanks Go Home on it.
When I invented that phrase and wrote that magazine, I did not mean Britpop to be what it later became.
When people say Britpop, I think of Tony Blair shaking hands with Noel Gallagher.
I felt partly responsible for it. You know, it's like kind of giving birth to some awful child.
If we'd known at the time, we would have run screaming.
Britpop, it was about a very particular, probably English sensibility. It's not big city music, it was suburban music. It was the revenge of the suburbs. Pulp, the Auteurs, Denim and Cud, Suede, the biggest of them. That literate art rock element of Britpop, which is what I was interested in, they all had that very particular English, outsider, suburban aesthetic.
I think if you're northern, if you've got an accent and you come from Moss Side, people understand you're working class. If you're southern and you don't have an accent and you come from Hayward, people don't get it.
It's much sort of leafier and...
It's just greener
than
I remember it as being a bit barren.
All these hedges just used to be sort of like chain link fences.
See you in your next life.
So that window there, that room, that's where I was born.
Nice.
I was born in the same room that my dad died in. My upbringing was a strange combination of marginal and extremely ordinary, that millions and millions of people were brought up in houses exactly like that.
It was about that context, that lumpen American domination. Write songs about going down to Worthing and flogging ice creams and all that. It's like, yes, someone is writing about the things we do and matter to us. That immersion in English culture, not about taking Ventura Highway, because we don't do that.
See you in your next life.
When you finally know what you're doing, you kind of move into this phase where what's called the imperial phase, where literally everything you do is kind of gold dust.
If you've gone through your life not really being anything, and then people telling you you're the saviour of the music industry, it does affect you.
Boring.
I felt like there was a platform and that we could use the platform then. And we could to a certain extent, although we couldn't use it anywhere near as much as I thought we could. I just thought we could do what the fuck we wanted.
Suede was always a balance in power, which was almost like a nuclear reactor. It could go wrong at any moment, but it didn't. It just stayed in this stasis until it went wrong, and then it blew up.
One of the problems that Bernard had is that when everything was about the music, then he was kind of the leader.
going around the fan club?
Once you're out in the world, a band isn't just about the music. And then immediately Brett becomes the focal point. And, you know, I think Bernard had a problem with that. And I don't think it's necessarily a problem with Brett. I think it's a problem with the musical aspect of the band being diminished.
The press, the adulation, and the things that bands need to do, like photo sessions and make videos, which he didn't find particularly creative or of interest.
He became quite disillusioned quite early on with our relationship with success. If there's differences between you, it'll pull at those differences and magnify them.
We went on an American tour just after Bernard's dad had died. I mean, I look back on it now and it was insane. If it were to happen now, I wouldn't want to be around a bunch of people partying all the time. You know, there's something about touring that it's a bit like being on holiday.
Bernard eventually started travelling with the Cranberries on their tour bus, which was a pretty big sign that something was going on.
We started, I think, having our arguments through music.
We would never sit down and talk about things.
It's difficult to know how to deal with these things when you're young men. You just don't have the tools, the emotional tools to deal with these things.
That's when most of these things do happen. You know, very few people go out there, pick up a guitar, age 52. Normally it's when you're 18, 19. Dangerous, very dangerous.
Bernard was obviously unhappy, and that tour went very badly, I think, for the band. By the time we made Stay Together, it was obvious things really weren't the same as they were on the first album. The mood of the band was very, very different.
And then you get Stay Together. It's basically a battle between Brett and Bernard, and the most vital part of the song is the bit at the end where Brett's vocals are buried under these kind of the squall of guitars, and you can't really tell what's going on. And there's a kind of incoherence to it that we'd never had before.
The relationship between Brett and Bernard was definitely changing and was getting more fraught. That obviously we had to get round to pushing them to make the second album.
When it came to writing Dogman Star, we'd write much more separately. We kind of communicated by post.
Everything that we became defined by in the first record drove me up the wall. I wanted to destroy it. I was writing stuff at home, and I just recorded endlessly, day in, day out, and then took him round to his place in Highgate. So I'd give him a 4-track with like 8 pieces on it or something, and a few days later he'd have overdubbed vocals, and then I got it back.
Yeah, it was a very strange way of working. You know, we wrote by post, and then we recorded kind of separately. The whole period of making Dogman Star was very, very, very prickly.
It was plain. There was a lot of tension in the room. And it just stayed like that.
I don't ever remember being in the studio in Master Up all together, possibly once or twice.
It was almost like shift work going on.
The shift pattern was basically Bernard didn't want to be in the studio with anybody else. He tolerated me because I was still required to operate the equipment.
Ed, he's a musical producer. You know, he was with us from the first single and kind of grew with us and was very much part of the band.
He was almost one of us.
You feel like you're part of a family. He's kind of like, he's the stable dad to your errant sons.
think there was at some stage Bernard was asking Ed to sort of teach him how to produce a record.
Bernard was immediately at home in the studio and wanted to learn everything. Every dial that was turned, every lever that was pulled.
My memory of Bernard is getting on with him really, really well until it all went wrong. He'd had a rough year. His dad had died, which was just as brutal as it can get, and he was just dreadfully, dreadfully unhappy. And I think the pressure of having to deliver this record that everybody was waiting for, plus his awakening realization that being a guitar player in this fantastic band wasn't what he thought it was going to be. There were other components that he wasn't comfortable dealing with.
Lying in my bed, nothing much to say. So I listened to the man. He said that Ed could be the two of us.
The song, The Two of Us, it was very much, I think, a song about mine and Bernard's relationship. Superficially, it's a song about two successful brokers or something like that, working in the city, making loads of money, but being quite lonely within that relationship. But the kind of subtext of that is that I think it's about loneliness within success.
I think I found myself treading on eggshells and hoping that it would go away, you know, and I hope it would sort itself out. But no, it just sort of got worse and worse and worse.
I must admit I was pretty blind to quite how bad things were. It was no problem to me if Bernard was like, OK, this chord moves this way, blah, blah, blah. Whereas when he started telling Simon what to do, Simon was kind of like, I'm the drummer, I know what I'm doing.
It was a situation where we were rehearsing. I think we were doing New Generation. It was a roll at the end of it.
What about you had a bit just before that? Yeah, that's fine.
And Bernard was adamant that it shouldn't go there, it should go somewhere else. And I was adamant that it should go here. I mean, he said, do your job. And that really pissed me off. So I picked up some drumsticks and just chucked them at his red guitar. And that was the point where me and him sort of... And he'd gone through the whole of the band, and I was the last one, it seemed, that he fell out with. I was very aware that something bad was happening.
I was very desperate, you know, had an idea in my head, and unfortunately at that age, I didn't really have the emotional or the social skills to deliver what I needed, you know, the diplomatic skills to deliver what I needed to do. But I didn't really give a fuck at the time, I'll be really honest with you. I did feel like I had something there and it would work, and I kind of had to get it across, so I'm full of apologies now. But that's how it was, you know, so basically I wanted it to be, where there was drums, they were going to be extraordinary, and where they weren't going to be drums, it was going to be extraordinary because there weren't drums.
Bernard's gift for music was just off the scale. We all knew it, there was no debate, but he did not like any other musical interference in his vision at that point. And that's why something like Asphalt World became so problematic for him.
Right, let's go.
Because we were kind of, you know, fighting a little bit, you'd sometimes come into this kind of ghost of a song. I remember that with Asphalt World, totally. You know, normally you'd build stuff up from the rhythm section, but I know with Asphalt World, I hadn't played on it, and I came in and there was just this serpent of guitar. As a musician, it was literally like, all right.
It was always quite a contentious song. It somehow sort of like encapsulated the differences in the band. I have a very distinct memory of delivering the vocal to that song after having read an interview that Bernard gave to Vox magazine, where he was quite critical of me as a writer and as a musician.
Brett was livid, but was also disappointed.
Feeling quite hurt and trying to almost like channel my feelings of anger and frustration into the kind of iciness of the vocal performance.
That tension was actually becoming quite poisonous, and I think it was difficult for Bernard, particularly, because he was not comfortable in that environment. And him and Ed didn't see eye to eye, and they had quite a lot of disagreements.
So what we're going to really do is do the drums and bass and go back and redo the guitars.
And so the power shift really was that Bernard was exercising more and more control over every aspect of the band's sound and how the record was made. And you know, he was still giving me my space to do my job, but I was mindful of the fact that there was 3 other people in the band, and I was trying to get the best possible record for everybody.
But not everything not to go out completely, just like drop right down. But
I think Ed was pretty much the last person on Bernard's blacklist. When he went for Ed, in a big way.
And when it went wrong, it happened over a weekend. It happened over a very short period of time.
I'm not sure whether that's to do with the 2 of them or it would have happened with any producer.
Suddenly we found ourselves in this position where he was making an ultimatum and saying either we get rid of Ed or I'm going.
It's not about him or Ed. It's about issuing an ultimatum. It doesn't work that way.
It was our band. It wasn't your band, it wasn't your band, it wasn't your band, it wasn't my band, it was our band.
No one has absolute power.
I felt as though I couldn't give in to that.
There was a lot of agonising and what-ifs and how do we deal with this and how do we make it right. It wasn't possible to make it right for everybody, and there needed to be a resolution about which probably not everybody was going to be happy.
We got a phone call from our lawyer saying that Bernard's officially said he's left the band.
People loved us. People followed us. We were in the midst of a record that sounded amazing. Now I look at it and think, if you want to leave that kind of situation, something as good as that, you must have been feeling terrible about us and what we were doing. And now I look back on it and think, I should have been thinking of him.
Of course, I would have done anything to have kept Bernard in the band and happy, but the fact was, he wasn't happy.
I was amazed that Bernard didn't leave sooner. It was so volatile from day one. It was unbelievably volatile.
Decisions that are made can't be made lightly, because you're talking about, you know, what is this a good thing to do? Is it a bad thing? You'll never know until it's too late. You roll the dice. But when it doesn't work, where do you go? What do you do? Well, what about the kids? What about the rhythm section?
I can remember thinking it was for the best. And it only being when kind of like music journalists started turning up outside the studio, realising, oh, this might be a bit of a bigger deal than I think it is.
In between trying to get the strings done for the Wild Ones and Still Life, I think we were doing in CTS Studios.
we should issue a press statement separate from Paranoid.
We were having this band meeting with Saul and the press office on the phone to try and get some sort of statement out.
We're not great at talking to each other. So in a situation like that, I think it's quite possible that we're all sitting there thinking, this is so fucked up, what are we going to do? But no one's going to say it, so you just keep on going.
It's the best decision for everybody. And they're going to say that the show will go on, that the album is amazing, the band will continue.
Oh, can I write the show will go on in mine?
No, I've done mine.
What have you written? Roll on Act 2?
I don't like that.
I guess I was sort of hiding from everything, hiding behind this sort of cliched rock star persona, you know, wearing my aviators in the control room, you know. I do remember feeling incredibly sort of, you know, very sort of bruised by it. At the heart of it was the loss of a friend, and that was very sad.
He was obviously heartbroken, but he hid it and just was like, right, I'm not going to get upset about this. It's almost like his business head took over.
Because you see, everything comes in there anyway.
I was bluffing it out, but I was absolutely terrified that we were over. I think 99% of the world thought that we were over, including a part of me. How were we going to carry on?
I knew we had a great album. Dogma Style was amazing, but we didn't have a guitarist.
I think it's a great record. I think you can hear the darkness, a bit like the Beatles' White Album.
The reason Dogma Style was so unique was because of the white-hot chemistry.
Sometimes the grit in the oyster makes the pearl, and I think some of that darkness and difficulty gets into Dogman Style in a good way, for me as a listener, if not for Suede as a band.
There was such breadth to it, and such a wide range of emotions to it.
My favourite Suede record, the one that just has everything, is We Are the Pigs. Police Car on Fire. The menace coming off that record.
We had this amazing record, and I wanted the world to hear this amazing record.
One of the things that's really remarkable about Suede is the fact they managed to keep going.
We just continued with kind of a bit of insane belief in our hearts. And then we put an advert in the paper, like we were 17 again.
You know, I guess I was just praying that we'd find somebody else who could be equally as good as Barnett, and the band would carry on.
Never worried me, because that band was always Brett and Matt to me in my head. So you think, well, I'll bring in another guitarist. I don't know, you can be 17 years old from Poole, that sounds fine.
Does anyone ever have these problems apart from us?
No, we're the only band in the world that has these problems.
Very quickly, when we had a conversation, they had said, we're going to find somebody else, and we're going to find somebody new, and we're going to put an ad in the Enemy, and we're going to find somebody, and everyone was just confident this was what was going to happen.
And it wasn't even a challenge. It's like, they grow on trees, we'll find a guitar player. And you wouldn't entertain this thing of, you know, Bernard's irreplaceable, there's nobody like Bernard. Fine, we'll find another guitar player. Not a problem.
As the weeks went on, I think it started to look a little bit more desperate. It was like, if anybody thinks they can do this job, send a cassette to this address. So one day I just thought, well, I'm anybody.
Most of them were just awful. There was a couple of fantastic rock guys with vests and kind of pointy-headed guitars and tattoos and shredding over the top of Suede tracks. They were brilliant. And then there was Richards.
The letter I sent them was quite cocky and sure of myself, which I, in reality, was not.
I put the cassette in, expecting to be underwhelmed, and I wasn't. I kind of heard this very, very eloquent, powerful, technically proficient guitar playing. He was playing a version of My Insatiable One, and it kind of, he played it beautifully.
I said, what's this? And he said, oh, this is a tape from an auditionee. Oh, well, this sounds great.
It was the first time I'd heard anyone play something of ours and really do the guitar part justice.
I didn't discover the guitar until I was about 12, the same time I discovered punk music. The way the punk bands like the Buzzcocks and the Clash and the Sex Pistols used to write songs was something I instantly understood at a very young age.
I remember the first time I went round to Richard's house. I told him that I played the guitar, and he handed me a guitar and said, show me what you can do. And I did some really, really basic, bad, strummed chords, and he laughed. He couldn't believe it. So I handed the guitar back to him and said, show me what you can do. And he just did this amazing 12-bar blues thing, and I was blown away. I think at that moment I knew that he was a very talented guitarist. But I think when you're that young, you don't really think of it in terms of somebody being a prodigy.
I knew how to put chords together and to write songs in that way, simple songs, and so I was doing that from that age as well, 12, 13. That's when I joined my first band.
Yeah, Richard and I were in a band up until about a year before he joined Suede, and Suede were one of several bands that he was enthusiastic about at that time, and I wouldn't even say it was the main band.
Well, this is also where I saw my very first gig, which was Suede in May '93. It was, and they were doing their first album tour, and they were at #1 at that point, I think. So it was a really busy gig.
Poole Arts Centre is not really on the regular touring circuit for a lot of bands, and so a band we liked were playing, so we were obviously going to go and see them.
Pete says that he remembers me saying something to him along the lines of, I could probably do that.
Richard was at that gig looking at Bernard as a lead guitarist on stage and thinking that he had a strong ambition to do the same thing. So he was able to make these quite intricate demos, but at the same time he was also sort of recording versions of songs that he liked.
What it feels like to me is just luck. I was really lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. I was still at school, but, you know, to actually... I mean, it was a real punt sending them a tape in the first place.
We gave Richard a call, and the story is quite famous. He was actually still at school at the time, and I think Charlie called.
And of course, the first thing my mum said was, "You do know he's only 17, you know."
And we're like, "Oh my God!"
So my cover was blown.
But we still invited him for an audition. We thought, well, you know, if you can play like that, why not?
We were seeing people, so you know, come one, come all.
I don't know. Late this afternoon. We've got Ed coming down later, producer. Ed Muller. He's coming down to check out this song, this new one.
In walks this little smallish kind of kid, you know, quite unassuming. Suddenly, as soon as he plays the guitar, he becomes a different person.
He didn't play like a 17-year-old. He played like he'd been doing this all his life. Made it clear what kind of prodigy he was.
So they invited me for an audition, but I still didn't think they'd actually offer me the job. That was just, you know, that was never going to happen. And then it did.
I said to Matt and Brett, I said, he's obviously the guitarist. I think the fact that he was 17 didn't really make any difference.
To read that again and again, especially throughout my career, 17-year-old, he was 17 years old when he joined the band.
It's such a Suede thing, taking a big risk, getting a 17-year-old guitarist.
I had immediately, obviously, had slight mixed feelings about it on a personal level, because I was just about to lose my best friend.
I had to give up absolutely everything here. It was like severing a connection.
So I went back to the sixth form a couple of weeks after that, and somebody said, "Oh, where's Richard?" And I said, "That's a funny thing, actually, you know, he's joined Suede." They just laughed at me and said, "Shut the fuck up."
The first thing he actually did was pose in a video for We Are the Pigs, which is just such an odd thing.
And then we started touring, and it's like 2 months or something.
And introducing a brand new face, Richard Oakes.
It's ridiculous how quickly it happened, but you can see that he grows into it really, really quickly.
I hadn't really done any actual gigs until I joined Suede, and it was just, we're going to go on tour. I think the first date was the 4th of October, so it was just after I turned 18.
It's down to the fact that he can really play, so it doesn't hold any real fears for him, I don't think.
Despite what the press was saying at the time, they were basically saying the band are over. So we were reading feature after feature where they were saying they've lost a key member, how are they going to recover from this? And despite all that, we knew that we would do a good tour. We knew that at the end of it, people would say, oh, they can still do this, they can still play.
It was a fantastic thing because it meant we were starting again. It felt for me like a new band. It had all the joys of being a new band.
That's fucking brilliant. Well done, let's do it again.
Suddenly, I was on stage playing and surrounded by girls, and I had no idea how to even talk to them. Do you know what I mean? It's like no experience at all. I was the most non-rock and roll person to join a rock and roll band.
Philadelphia was a good laugh. I enjoyed that. And going Washington was like the first gig we did. You know, people think, Simon, stop! Simon's filming me. Simon, don't, please.
We went to Asia for the first time, which was amazing. We sort of hadn't experienced anything like it before. We turned up in, I think the first one we did was Bangkok. And I think Charlie got a message on the plane that there may be a couple of kids there, there may be a camera crew there.
Fucking hell, it's thousands of them.
There was camera crews everywhere, there was police everywhere, and it was absolute chaos. We sort of toured Japan, couldn't leave the hotel without being chased by kids. That was mind-blowing for us. But can you imagine what it was like for Richard?
If I was him and I was thrown into that, I don't know what kind of person I'd be now.
Reading about yourself for the first time is a very strange thing. When you read a journalist's perception of who you are and where you've come from and your place in the band and and just describing you, it's really, really odd. It's like looking in a very distorted mirror, you know.
Of course, there was then the concern about the third album. The only thing we didn't know was, well, do we know if he can write any songs?
Proving ourselves that we could actually write another record was a different thing, obviously. Coming Up would have taken much longer to write if I hadn't had this period of finding my feet, which was the touring Dog Man Star for a whole year.
In terms of whether we had something to prove, hell yes.
Diesel and gasoline, psycho for drum machine, shaking tits to hit out, drag act, drug act, suicide, in your dad's suit you hide, saying his name again out.
Richard turned up with a cassette one day called Dead Leg, and me and Alan were in the middle of one of our parties, I seem to remember. And Richard sort of sat there, had a cup of tea, while I was sort of like swaying and trying to focus my eyes. And I kind of ended up kind of going to work on the song and listen to this riff that he'd written, which is it's like, oh wow, that's really good, And I sort of started weaving this song around the riff, High on Diesel and Gasoline, Psycho for Drum Machine, this sort of bits torn out of the pages of my notebook.
Second,
Your
the first two verses
working, is it?
Yeah, it is. It's working right. The first two verses it was like this. Sounds like this. Here they come, the beautiful ones, the beautiful ones. La, 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 here they come, the beautiful ones.
I kind of started to piece this song together, a song about my sort of marginal life on the edges of proprietary. And I called it Beautiful Scum. That was the original title of the song. Here they come, the beautiful scum. It was this sort of, here I am, this is my life, deal with it. And I thought, okay, this is really good, but beautiful scum, no, it's a bit silly, isn't it? Let's change it to Beautiful Ones. And that was that's the song. And there was this sort of very funny afternoon, completely off our faces, and I was just singing the song, sweating in this little tiny orange room.
Oh, God, yeah. Sorry, start again.
That is not a single. Sorry, no choice there. It's definitely not a single. If that's what you want the song to be, then fine. So that make it really.
You need blackmail like that.
It's not blackmail.
Okay, bring on the expectation. This is going to be great. Because I think we knew it was good, and it didn't sound like Dogman Star.
Try that in the track.
We wrote far more as a band after Richard joined. We spent a lot more time with the band kind of arranging things. He was really comfortable with that. He's never been precious about his songs. You know, cut them up, move them around. If it's better for the song, if it's better for the band, then he's fine that way.
Oh, this is nice. Everyone's together, right? It's lovely, isn't it?
I very much wanted it to be a band again, to sort of like work together and to write in the same room and, you know, to try and do all those things that I felt we'd missed out on with Dogman Star, that we kind of drifted into this weird state.
And then we accidentally became a five-piece. I was lending Neil a suit, because I think he was going for an interview for a job in London. He'd just come down from Hull, where he was at university.
So I thought I'd kind of borrow a suit off Simon. He was the only person I knew who had a suit.
Yeah, pop along to the studio tomorrow.
Simon neglected to mention that his cousin was actually a pretty good musician.
I don't think I knew he was a musician at the time. He was just my cousin Neil from Hull. And that was it. I had no knowledge that he was going to sit down and play the piano.
I remember, I think it was the first day you turned up and Simon was videoing you playing the piano and you had "Sign On" written on your hand.
Yeah. A few days later, Simon said, "Oh, come hang out some more."
And that's how it happened, really. That's how he became in Suede. We weren't looking for anybody else. I actually seem to remember me saying to Brett, "Are you sure about this?"
Kind of cared about music, and he had a passion and an intensity as well. And I just sort of knew he should be part of the band, really.
I think there was a shrug of the shoulders when Simon's cousin was introduced.
Yeah, Charlie was a bit suspicious at first. I went round to his place in Islington and he said, "Well, I don't know why they've decided this, but apparently Suede want another member."
You know, if it had been John from Camden or something, there might have been less of a shrug, but there was something about the fact that someone's relative just popped in the studio and now he's in the band. But it wasn't like that. It was a slow process of osmosis. He turned up for a couple of times, did a couple of things, and then just became a little bit more present. And musically, there was definitely something he brought to it very quickly indeed.
But I think Matt was quite difficult to get to know early on. He didn't speak to me for about 6 months.
I like four pieces. They look right to me. All of those doubts, all of those possible problems were negated by the fact that we made a great noise together. We were playing the songs and they sounded brilliant. Nothing really matters if that's right.
It got quite confusing for Ed. He didn't know our names early on. He couldn't distinguish between us. And I think that he used to call Richard Newboy and me New Boy, just because he was scared of calling me Richard and Richard Neil.
Yeah, it is true. Nobody else in Suede is like him. You know, Suede is a band of individuals at the best of times, but Neil is unique. And he's actually turned into a very, very good foil with Richard. The two of them actually complement each other perfectly.
Oh, fuck off! Neil appearing, as he kind of did, and starting to kind of tinkle on the piano along with what we were doing, just felt like part of that evolution into a new band. Around the time that Neil started appearing, we were writing songs like Saturday Night.
Lots of people thought that Richard couldn't replace Bernard as a songwriter.
He couldn't have two more different sort of like experiences, you know, writing Dogman Star and then writing Coming Up, you know.
We were such a close-knit unit, and that was a new thing for Suede. I think there'd been an awful lot of separatism when they were recording Dogman Star.
We were kind of a little family again, and we were a little gang again, and that was a lovely thing, and I'd really miss that.
Coming Up was a collection of incredibly precise, concise pop songs. It was definitely an attempt to stamp a new identity on the new band, the new lineup.
I've always been into punk and post-punk, and that very distilled style of skew-if pop music that punk brought along. And I think I sort of woke that up in Suede a little bit. When we came to write things like She and Film Star, they weren't punk songs, but they really had that kind of sense of brutality and simplicity behind them.
Saul still thought we were missing the anthem, the kind of definitive song for the album.
You need a first single, you need a kind of flagship statement. You know, you had We Are the Pigs last time.
Then there was a song called Piss Pot that kind of, I must have liked something about. But I didn't like the chorus, and I got Richard to say, no, the verse is all right, but change the chorus. He wrote this chorus, and I was like, okay, this is great. And I wrote this thing, oh, you and me, we're the lovers on the street, we're the litter on the breeze. And I thought, okay, that's really good.
Ed had been telling me on the phone, you've got to come and hear this. And I went to the studio and they played me Trash. And I was like, oh, this is amazing.
I wrote the song as a song about the band and this sort of group of people and what our values as people were. By extension, it's about the fans as well. And it was an incredibly important song for Suede, Trash. For the first time, it defined for me my tribe. And my tribe was something that I was looking for all my life, I think, from childhood. When I was a child, I never quite fitted in. My family never quite fitted in. And I think I was looking for that. Songs like So Young and We Are the Pigs and all these sorts of things. I'm looking for a group of people that I could identify with. And with Trash, I think I was defining it. This slightly lost group of people that weren't connected geographically, but connected in terms of who they saw themselves as.
A pop star type limo will be picking you up tomorrow. This is to take you off to Top of the Pops to do your pop star number 3 hit thing. Have fun.
The period for me feels joyous is the right word.
It was one of the most fun records I've ever made. It was such an optimistic record, and that was a side of Suede that nobody had heard yet.
And the band had survived, they'd made an amazing record, the songs were fantastic, there was a happiness to it, the artwork by Peter Saville, super technical, and that just felt like the mood in the band at the time.
Peter Saville was this incredible designer who did all the great artwork for Factory Records. the Joy Division records and New Order album sleeves, and is regarded probably as one of the greatest designers. There was a process of, you know, lots of trips to Peter's house, where he would walk out in his robe.
I'd come at about 2 in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon, in breaks between recording, and you'd always be in your dressing gown.
Yeah.
And you'd sort of like wander down the stairs and kind of like, you know, blearily yawning and asking for coffee.
Yeah.
Like some sort of character in an Evelyn Waugh novel, you know. It was all...
In a way, that was what it was for a while, you know. You'd left one day, and I was thinking, oh, what does he want? And I went back and looked on the bookshelf, and I found this, Paul Wunderlich. There were things in this that were just so terrible that they were interesting. There was this weird kind of psychedelic, surreal quality that this had.
Perfect for Suede,
Absolutely.
then, yeah? I loved it. I like the sort of the surreal element of it, and I love the sort of like the sexuality of it. But I like the garishness as well.
We told what they were going to do. There would be 3 people, and they would be in the studio, and what should they be on? And what I was thinking was that in lots of the Wunderlich pictures, there were things like zebra skins and tiger skins and things. So I was thinking, should it be some kind of rug? And then you went, well, it's a mattress. Wow. There's too many drugs, right? So then you said, you know, like in a squat. And of course, we found this amazing striped one. It's the mattress makes it. The mattress is what gives it this kind of cultural demographic. The mattress is brilliant.
I think it was incredibly satisfying making that record. And Matt's talked about the importance of revenge as a motivation in making music, and he's absolutely right.
You can't keep us down. We're back. We're trash, but you know, we keep coming back.
I think the press, some of them were slightly disappointed that we didn't fall flat on our faces, you know. And kind of we came back with what was commercially our most successful record.
It just seemed to be growing and growing and growing, and it certainly got a lot bigger. The fan base got a lot bigger.
And the 5 singles that we took from that album all went top 10. We had 5 top 10 singles from Coming Up, which was unprecedented.
Was Film Star the last? I think it was the last single.
Because this is Peter sitting in the back of
Yeah, he
a limo.
decided, Brett decided that I was a suitable casting for the sort of slightly past his sell-by date, you know, kind of actor.
The louche playboy,
yeah, maybe
you know.
some British guy, a little bit louche who'd ended up in Hollywood.
And Peter did it. So
But,
that's him sitting in that's him in the photo.
But it was past his prime.
I remember feeling just utterly bulletproof, feeling just indestructible.
The Roundhouse shows were absolutely brilliant. I remember loving every second of it. We were at the absolute peak. We'd done a few months of touring by that point, and it had been good. We've been going from strength to strength.
At this point, when we played the Roundhouse in '96, that period playing here was almost like a sort of little pinnacle, wasn't it? Everything felt very rosy at that point, didn't it?
It was like 6 months into a 16-month tour that we did for Coming Up. So it was in the middle of it.
It felt fun though, still, didn't
absolutely.
it? It was like playing here was a real moment, I think.
Just everything really loud, everything really fast, never any gaps between songs. Just pummel them for like an hour and a half and then go out.
After the Roundhouse, we played another 9 months of shows.
What made Coming Up so amazing, and that tour afterwards was, I mean, it was a party in every sense. There was that fantastic thing that doesn't happen very often when you feel like the band's really good and everyone wants you to be really good.
You've always got to remember that happiness is fleeting. It's just a moment in your life. You just have to grab hold of it, and you know it's gone like a puff of smoke.
Towards the end of '97, towards the end of that tour, I think things were taking a downward turn. The punk attitude that existed within Brett meant that it was quite easy to say, well, it's going well, let's ruin it. You know?
The coming up touring period was, looking back on it now, overly long.
It was a victim of its own success. You know, that record was very successful.
We toured literally for a year and a half. We were pretty knackered, not having any time off whatsoever.
Looking back at it, that wasn't good for us at all. It was disastrous. It kind of broke us in lots of ways.
Once the coming up tour was over, I remember kind of retreating a bit. Just trying to kind of centre myself and make things normal again, because that tour was so long, just living in this kind of cuckoo clock of excess.
We took a lot of drugs and partied and did what we wanted. You can't just turn that off.
Once the tour was over, that's when I think the line blurred between leisure time and work time.
Moving on from coming up to Head Music, we'd moved houses and it became darker. There was darker drugs. There was, if I could say it, there was a lot of crack cocaine and heroin, and that changed the whole climate, the whole atmosphere changed. And yes, it changed. It changed.
I know, that sounds so well. It was kind of horrible, actually. I hated it. I remember scurrying up and down this alleyway at various ungodly hours. I bought this place, I think it was at the end of the Coming Up tour. It's an odd place, and it's unobserved. It felt like we didn't have to abide by the usual laws of society, so we didn't.
When it comes to excess and addiction and, you know, using, people expected that, especially of him. And that's not a good position to be in, where people are going, go on, fuck up, you know, and that's what they were doing. And he kind of did.
I can't use words like drugs, because I just sort of find it hard to talk in those terms. And I'm not fooling anyone by not using those words, but I personally find it really difficult, so I have to talk about it in broader terms. I think I deep down knew that I was in real trouble, but I think I justified my addiction by sort of seeing it as part of some sort of rock and roll mythology that justified it.
Brett just became a very different person, very different. Hardly ever saw him, you know. Never used to go out, never used to sort of hang out a lot there, because it was something I wasn't interested in. I just didn't want to get into that.
When we started writing Head Music, which was only a couple of months after the end of the Coming Up tour, I was living in a different house by this point, and I didn't used to like going there because there were various characters hanging around who weren't friends of the band. They were, you know, drug people, basically, and they were all a bit sinister, and so I didn't like going to his house. So that removed quite a key part of the human personal connection that you need for songwriting.
I'd pop round to Brett's and he'd be off his head. You'd just roll your eyes and go home, and you say, I can't hang around with these people, you know. But you'd go home and you'd carry on.
I think Brett's main idea for Head Music was we're going to make a Prince record. It's going to be a groove-based thing with kind of minimalistic musical ideas, and it's going to sound quite kind of cold as well. That'll be the Suede part of it. It'll be cold and icy and dark.
The music that Richard and I were coming up with wasn't quite exciting Brett or kind of pressing his buttons, so he started writing stuff himself.
You know, and it was like Ride on Time by Black Box, and it's, do you know what I mean? It's like I was there with Everything Will Flow and Leaving and these songs that, you know, that I was coming up with at the time, and it's like, I can't do that. You know, I did, but I never said that to him, but it was like the strangest thing in the world. It's like, this, what the hell is this record going to sound like?
He just was like into noises. He was staying up until 3 o'clock in the morning. He had a Juno synth, and he'd just go, and he'd come to me and say, I want a riff that goes, there's no notes in there. There's no tune in there. It was all about a kind of aggressiveness and attitude.
If I'd have been around, I'd have said Dreadful Mistake, because Suede is a guitar band. That's what Suede is, it's a guitar band.
It didn't seem like Brett was fully himself. He was in his addiction. He wasn't able to write in the same way. There wasn't the same depth.
So give me this and give me that, smother me and give me some of that bad stuff. I feel real now, talking that sugar and shaking that stuff.
Can't Get Enough was almost the tipping point between, you know, I can't get enough drugs. That's what the song's about.
So with this set of quite eclectic demos, we went into Eastcote Studios to record Head Music with a new producer.
I remember Brett saying we're going to try a new producer. I think that's not a good thing to do. I think we should stick with Ed. He's always been, you know, part of the band here, really, the sort of sixth member of the band.
We changed producers. Steve Osborne produced that record.
Steve Osborne was known for his work with the Happy Mondays and sort of dance bands and beats and stuff, and not really with guitar bands.
Looking at it, it was absolutely the wrong thing to do, because Steve, you know, very talented guy, but he didn't have the history with Suede. He didn't have that kind of paternal instinct almost that Ed's always had with the band.
Something like that. A bit too literal. Yeah, but I quite like that. I know it's kind of like a bit corny, but...
He had been told clearly this is not a guitar record. So I think he didn't want to kind of view my contributions to the record as, you know, a crux, essential thing, you know, in the way that they were for Coming Up, and especially on the first two albums as well. It was all about the guitars. You would spend a long time recording guitars with Ed. It'd be weeks and weeks and weeks.
Steve's much more kind of like, let's take these raw materials and play with them. You know what I mean? He'd get Richard to come in and play guitar for 2 minutes and then go, right, now we've got 2 hours turning that into something. You know, he's a mixer as much as a recorder.
For me personally, I didn't enjoy doing a couple of bars of Can't Get Enough and then having it looped. I'd have rather played the whole song, you know, live like we normally do.
I would kind of sit there in the control room and listen to what Steve Osborne and Ben Hillier were doing, but be completely unable to contribute because I don't know anything about loops and synths and grooves, and at least I didn't then. All I knew about was how to put a killer guitar line together, and that was the one thing that wasn't required. So I felt like a fifth wheel, literally.
We didn't feel like a complete unit anymore. You know, Brett was never to be seen. I hardly ever saw him in the studio.
Having established myself as the hub of the band, I suddenly wasn't really there. I wasn't really present. And so it's like kind of the keystone is missing in the building. Everything became slightly atomized. And I drifted off, and Richard drifted off, and Neil drifted off, and it became this odd record that was sort of like almost made by Matt and Steve Osborne in a funny sort of way.
It was horrible. It was really stressful. I mean, I don't want to give the impression that what was happening was I was here making the record because no one was here. I was here out of politeness more than anything, because it just seemed rude to leave Steve here on his own with this kind of like these satellites orbiting around him, every now and then beaming a message in.
Matt was there more than any other member of the band, and that's crazy way to make a record.
I think you two need to start your communication with it.
Well, I think we can rewind that.
I remember this so clearly. If he'd been doing crack, he'd push his hair back so he didn't set light to his hair. So if his hair was up when he came in, me and Steve were like, oh, fuck it. That's today. It's going to be kind of like half an hour of him rushing around, you know, playing this on the keyboard, playing this on the singing, and then going again. If his hair was down, then it was probably going to be pretty good. I can remember doing Everything Will Flow. And it had been a really grim time in the studio, and we hadn't really been able to rehearse it properly because no one was here. And, you know, Brett and Richard especially couldn't really talk to each other because what they wanted but seemed to be completely different things. And then we sat and played Everything Will Flow, and I think it's second take or something, and it sounds amazing.
Well, first of all, there was my addiction. Secondly, there was Richard's marginalisation. And thirdly, there was Neil's illness.
He was basically unable to leave his house for a lot of '98.
He just suddenly couldn't do anything. And everyone was kind of, what the fuck's wrong with him? In my mind, it was connected to the tour fatigue of coming up, you know, the physical length of that tour and how exhausting it was. I don't think that helped, to put it that way.
Somewhere around Christmas '96, I got glandular fever or some kind of virus that wiped me out. We were in the middle of this long tour, and I just carried on ploughing through. And we'd come off tour, and I'd go out with my mates, doing all sorts of things, smoking myself blind, drinking too much, all the other things, when I should have been looking after myself to kind of knock this virus on the head. And I'd get a little cold and be wiped out, and there would be a time where I'd just spend weeks in bed. And I don't know whether it was what you'd call ME or some chronic fatigue or glandular fever or something, but these waves of being completely knocked out, unable to contribute to the band or actually get up and make it toast or anything, it kind of really took it out of me.
Within and around the band, there was a fair degree of cynicism about what was wrong with him.
When I look back on it now, kind of saw his illness as a stumbling block and something to be worked round, rather than ever really saying to him, how do you feel?
I think I was very angry about what was going on, and I think that I was immature enough to sort of like direct my anger at him without realising what was going on.
I don't think they understood. I don't really, even now I don't really understand what was happening to me.
Richard, speak to Neil, I'm just doing something.
My main memory of recording Head Music is 8 months of basically just me and Matt in the studio. Neil being on the other end of the telephone, being sent cassettes and phoning up to say what we should be doing, and Brett turning up at sort of 10 o'clock at night in an altered state.
I'd like to hear a more extreme version of this sound with more distortion and more filter.
The low points on it, they're awful.
Give me head, give me head, give me head music instead. I said, aha.
If we'd had any kind of clear eyes and clear hearts, we would have said, there's half a great record here. It's got some of my favourite, Indian strings, can't get enough, everything will flow. These are as good as we've ever done.
Take a look inside me, inside my mind, and you'll see my heart is broken too.
I don't disown that record at all. I just regret that it wasn't seen through with the right kind of conviction.
Down is, I think, the best example of Brett being nakedly honest about where his life was at that point.
You draw the blinds and blow your mind away, and there's a sadness in your style.
Down's quite a dark song. I wrote it after a pretty horrific incident where my girlfriend kind of had a kind of overdose, I suppose. There was this horrific convulsive fit in the flat over there, and I remember 4 in the morning kind of leaning over her and doing CPR and pumping her heart and all this sort of thing, and it was pretty horrific. That was the low point. That was the turning point for me. I suddenly saw what I was doing to myself, and I saw how I was throwing my life away, and I saw it with perspective. And from then on, even though it wasn't a clean break, I managed to claw my way out of the pit and, yeah, get myself clean again, get myself healthy again.
There was something particularly darkly hedonistic about that 90s Britpop era, in a way that, like a lot of scenes have, people talk about the music business, the good drugs and the bad drugs.
The music industry eats its young. It always does. It doesn't mind. It's very happy for Sway to take a lot of drugs and have a drug album and for them to disappear because there's another one in the pipeline. At least there used to be in the 90s, and now there's not anymore. And that's why, as an industry, they sort of disappear. They didn't take care of people. There's an awful lot of casualties in the music industry in lots of different ways.
I'm not sure we would listen to anyone. That's the trouble. We're responsible, you know what I mean? As long as you can learn from your mistakes, and we've made so many mistakes that we've probably learnt quite a lot.
Drugs were celebrated a lot back then. It was a very different culture, a very different time. It was probably wrongly put, shoved under the carpet. And I think a lot of people, particularly management, record companies, think, wow, it's a good thing because it helps the creative process. And I think a lot of people got damaged because of that later on in life, as we know.
That whole period of my life, when I think back on it, just makes me feel so sad that any of us put ourselves through that. I think there was this sort of myth that taking drugs makes you a better artist, but the opposite is true. It makes people caricatures of themselves.
I think that what happened in 1998, 1999 is pretty much my fault. Not to be too kind of sort of black and white about it, but it's, you know, it's on my shoulders, really, what happened. You know, if all of the problems could have been contained if I'd have had a clear head, I suppose. And I do feel as though it's my fault, yeah.
On the road, again.
Once the Head Music Tour was out of our system and we started writing in early 2000, Brett was clean, but we were struggling. We were running out of energy and struggling to come up with ideas. And then Neil decided that he couldn't really face recording another album and doing another tour, so he left in March 2001.
It took 7 years to get over it. And I'm not the same person. I didn't recover to be the same kind of person, have the same kind of energy as I did before I got sick. So it did completely change me.
Alex Lee joined pretty much as soon as Neil left, and I loved working with Alex. But we were kind of a sinking ship by this point.
New morning, God.
A slow, painful death.
Musically, we were done. We'd run out of inspiration. We really had.
Even though I made it in a very clean state, it was still the shadow of addiction was very, very present. And it felt like I was imbalanced. It was a sort of seesaw that kind of like the mirror image of it almost, you know, the kind of all the darkness is sort of turned into some sort of like ersatz kind of positivity, and it just didn't work at all. And I do disown that record. Unlike Head Music. I wish we'd never made it. I wish we'd never made that record.
We're in the ICA because we played 5 nights here in September 2003.
We came here and we played all of our albums so far, which wasn't as much of a cliche as it is now, I don't think.
I remember pushing this through because I was, at the back of my mind, I was thinking that we hadn't really got long left, to be honest. And I wanted to do something that was had a sort of retrospective feel, that kind of closed, that sort of closed the book, as it were. Because I suppose I wanted to celebrate our career, really, more than anything. I wanted to sort of say, well, you know, the album that we just released was a disaster, but it wasn't always that way, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it's down to, essentially, it's down to my life spiraling out of control that disaster struck, you know. I think it was my addictions that meant that I didn't care enough about the band anymore, to be honest, and that's an absolute tragedy, that I didn't care enough about the band, and I lie awake still regretting that now. I think it's a terribly sad thing, and I sort of apologise deeply for that, when you're addicted to substances, you know, nothing else matters. And that's such a sad thing that I didn't realise that.
And I think it would have happened anyway.
Yeah, possibly.
I think it's just the nature of Suede to push things a little too far. You know,
yeah.
It had always worked for us, and we were too young to know that you can break things like that.
It was only a few weeks after these shows that you dropped the bombshell at the Graham Norton show, of all places.
When it came to the Graham Norton show and the decision was made and we had that meeting, for a split second it was a surprise and a nasty shock to hear that we were splitting up. But then immediately afterwards I thought, I should have seen that coming.
And I was pissed off that we didn't talk about it, and Brett suddenly decided to tell us at the Graham Norton show.
Yeah.
I think I was a bit pissed off that you said split up. The word split up is so different from saying taking a break.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was just like final. It was a final thing.
Yeah.
I didn't want it to be final.
Yeah.
I certainly wanted a break, but I didn't want it to be final.
I can't remember what I said. I remember,
you said it's over for Suede. Those
Did
were
I?
your words.
I thought I said something like, I can't do this anymore.
You said, I think it's over for Suede.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Okay, did I?
Yeah, and then, so that, for me, meant splitting up.
I can always tell when you see a band that
And I was
got
quite
together
proud that we actually said, no, we're going to split up.
Yeah.
I think sort of so many more bands should split up.
Here's a list.
You know?
And here's a list.
Did you think Suede would reform at that time?
No.
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 Gee.
What's in the camera?
That was fucking brilliant. Can't really say further than that.
That was fucking brilliant. That was like the best gig ever.
I think it possibly was, actually.
What about After Metal Mickey?
What was that? What was that? That was insanity. That's never happened, surely.
I had no intention of reforming Suede for many, many, many years. And then the Teenage Cancer Trust called us up and asked us if we wanted to do a show. And I just thought, why not?
Good evening. This way.
So I called Matt first.
Literally, if you'd said to me, do you want to reform Suede, I would have said no. But he just called up and said, look, the Teenage Cancer Trust have asked us to play the Albert Hall. And it just felt like, oh, this could be, this could end it, you know what I mean? It didn't feel like a beginning in any way. It felt like this is the end that it should have had.
Richard was the only member of the band that had reservations.
You know, the idea of opening any old wounds was kind of scary, even up to the actual gig. So I wasn't thinking beyond that show at all.
Yeah, I think we were all in agreement that
it was just going to be one gig and then leave it and have this sort of like, whoa, you know, kind of thing, and then just walk away again.
And there was something really cool about doing something that was going to cost us a load of money. Give money to a good cause and then disappear. You know, I think there was a part of me that thought, no one can say we did this for the wrong reasons.
And there's very much a sense that we got off stage, well, that was too good not to do again. It was so, so important to try and sort of re-establish ourselves as a creative force again. Not to be one of those bands that was part of the nostalgia circuit, you know.
Where the band lost its way, we kind of stopped making music that sounded like Suede. And I think since we got back together, we've learned how to do that again. And I think we can trust ourselves to make that kind of music now.
With the Blue Hour, we've come to a point where we just know what our strengths are.
At the moment, we're in production rehearsals somewhere in Bedford Way. We've got all the sound sorted out, and we just want to go out and play it now. And that's my sort of favourite part of any album that we release, is the initial sort of...
Not those 5 days of hard work spent actually recording it that you did.
3 days of hard work.
Can I just point out, me and Richard and Neil spent a year and a half writing it. Simon flies in for 5 days.
Wow, you know.
We've relearnt how to make a record together, and I think it's quite contrary to the way most bands work. With these last 3 albums, especially The Blue Hour, we've kind of always been in the room together, me, Richard and Brett, and it's something very fresh about that.
We've had to learn to almost like put all ego to one side. If someone doesn't like what you do or doesn't like an idea you have to just move on and try harder and not let it get to you, which in the past it did.
There's a kind of purity now which goes back to the very early days, and I think it's taken us 3 records to kind of strip away some of the flim-flam and to get back to that really pure state of just being a band making records that you like. When we came back, Bloodsports had kind of fizzy pop singles on it and things for radio. And then we did Night Thoughts, which was much more knotty and tangled and difficult. And people loved it. People came with us. I think we almost underestimated our audience. I think the thing we've learned over these 3 records is there's a group of people who will come with us if we go on a strange path somewhere.
The lessons we learned from Night Thoughts were huge. To make a record which we thought was quite an uncompromising, challenging, quite difficult record, and to realise that people like that rather than wanting to hear sort of our version of pop music, which no one really wants to hear anymore, least of all us, was a real revelation in making this record, and it kind of allowed us to take it the next level, further left field sort of thing, and allowed us to do strange and unpleasant things. This is the first one we've done in this trilogy where I personally really feel that I know where it wants to go.
Take her cold hands, place the snowdrops in her palm, and pushing through the wall, I had no choice but to follow you.
You got to feel when you make an album that you've done something a bit of a risk. I think a lot of people at this stage in their career want to just service their fans and do what they think is expected of them. To be able to push yourselves to do something different and still it be the band and still be interesting, it's hard, you know, it's very hard.
For me, the creative state is so much about a state of flux. It's so much about kind of reacting against things. It's so much about having points to prove that as soon as you kind of get to a stage where you feel as though you've learned everything or whatever, it's almost like, well, then you're kind of neutered and then you're not creative anymore. It feels like there can never be that end point. There isn't a nice, neat ending to this.
Brett is one of the great British rock lyricists, and that he's not given enough credit for that. I mean, on the new record, there's a song called Fly Tipping. Genius. There is an indefinable suadeness that's there in The Drowners and that's there in Fly Tipping.
What is my name? What is yours? Do we own these things? What has it all been for? Fly tipping on the road of love.
Fly Tipping is a good encapsulation of the Suede journey. It's about a couple who, over the years, have acquired all this baggage, and the next part of their journey through life is to then get rid of it and to look to a future where you're not weighed down by the past. Lots of Suede World is trying to find beauty within the darkness, the kind of outskirts, the sort of liminal in-between places. I don't see any other bands here. It sort of seems to be our own little territory, and we're probably welcome to it. The scruffy bits of the world are just more interesting. You know, look at the pylons. They're so majestic.
The thing is, I bet Monaco has got pylons.
Whatever little bumps in the road there were, whatever decisions they got wrong, you know, they also got an awful lot right.
Suede are massively important. We may be seeing the last days of the rock music that Suede were part of. And that's not to be sort of woe is me. It's just the fact of, you know, music all died out. Bands of guitars might die out.
It's really rare that you keep going because it's hard to be in a band. All the egos, resentments, why has he got that, why has he got that credit? Why have we got an old drummer that looks like a sex offender? You know, shit like that can break a band up. But it didn't. It didn't. They stuck by him.
I hate Ricky Gervais.
The evolution of British rock music that begins in the late 1950s and is still just about going on now, Suede are one of the key people in that. And absolutely one of the key bands in it. They're one of a handful of great British rock bands who pushed it on, who did something new, who brought a different aesthetic to it and changed everything.
Michael Christie, you're an evil, insane robot.
No, I haven't now.
That's all that your films are going to be, is people saying, "Oh, Simon, suck him off."
I'll be pissed.
Don't do that.
Why are you filming me, you horrible git?